With South Korea being elected once more as a non-permanent member of the UNSC, we take a look at what this means for regional security as stakes are high on the Korean Peninsula. And the nation set forth new strategies to tackle what it deems to be a complicated security environment, particularly regarding North Korea. This as the Yoon administration published its National Security Strategy Guidelines today. The OECD revised upward its forecast for world economic growth this year, and so did the World Bank, more than its previous prediction. However, the OECD suggested lower growth for South Korea. It's June 7th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with news of South Korea's election once more to the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member for a 2-year term that begins next January. It was welcomed by many here in Korea as the deemed stakes are high on the peninsula. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
Republic of Korea, 180.
180 votes out of a total of 192. South Korea on Tuesday earned more than 2/3 of the vote needed to become a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. The 2-year term set to begin next year marks the country's return to the Security Council after 11 years. It also marks the country's 3rd time to take a seat on the council. President Yoon touted South Korea's election win, saying that the country's entry to the UNSC is a victory of global diplomacy. Foreign Minister Park Jin also tweeted that South Korea will spare no effort in promoting freedom, peace, and prosperity across the world. In a briefing on Wednesday, the Foreign Ministry said South Korea's entry is expected to serve as an opportunity to establish itself as a global pivotal state that contributes to the peace, security, and prosperity of the international community. And among key items on the agenda is dealing with issues related to North Korea.
As we're directly involved in issues on the Korean Peninsula, we will actively contribute to making efforts to respond to North Korea's threat on nuclear development at the Security Council.
South Korea's ambassador to the UN, Hwang Jun-guk, also pledged to expand South Korea's role as a global pivotal state by tackling North Korea-related issues.
We are ready to deal with other significant regional and thematic Security Council issues, including counterterrorism and the long-standing DPRK issues, both nuclear and the human rights situation.
On top of this, South Korea plans to lead discussions on cybersecurity, women's peace and security, as well as climate. It will also establish a UNSC task force within the Foreign Ministry to better prepare itself for a successful 3rd term. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The UN Security Council deals with core issues related to security around the world. We take a look at what it means for South Korea to obtain a seat on this body at a time when threats are increasing from the north. Our senior foreign affairs correspondent Peun-ji has more on the experts' take.
As a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for 2 years beginning in 2024, South Korea will be able to better address North Korea-related issues. It will now be involved directly in discussions and debates regarding statements and resolutions passed by the Security Council, which has the primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security. Speaking to Arirang News, an expert said South Korea's role as a non-permanent UNSC member is symbolic, as it shows the country's position as a legitimate world leader, and that it'll be able to express its desires to the international community, especially on matters that the country has a great interest in, such as human rights and nuclear proliferation.
So South Korea's membership on the council is significant insofar as it now participates directly in voting on resolutions that are binding on all member states.
The UN Security Council is comprised of 5 member states and 10 non-permanent members. As a member of the Council, South Korea will also be able to strengthen trilateral cooperation with the U.S., a permanent member, and Japan, a member of the Council for the 2023 to 2024 term. This is the first time since 1997 that the 3 countries have taken seats at the UN Security Council together. As North Korea has recently ramped up the development of its nuclear and missile programs, the 3 countries have been working together to better respond to those threats. However, there are still challenges left in order to implement strong measures against North Korea. as the UN Security Council cannot make a decision if there's a veto from one of the 5 permanent members, which includes China and Russia, with both countries unlikely to change their position on Pyongyang. Another expert explained it's unlikely that there will be any major improvements in terms of taking stronger action against North Korea, but expressed hopes, saying that South Korea will be able to show that it supports anti-authoritarian regimes and take part in newly emerging security issues.
Now, South Korea is at the best position to initiate and institutionalize at UN level our value originating from our successful experiences of economic growth, political development, innovative and transparent market system, and science and technology or something.
배은지, Arirang News.
Outlined today was the nation's new national security strategy under President Yoon, as the top office says it'll serve as a compass for the country's policies on North Korea, diplomacy, and national defense. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young brings us the highlights.
South Korea will focus on broadening and strengthening its multilateral engagement as it looks to become more global to secure its national and economic security. The Yoon administration released its national security strategy on Wednesday, elaborating its policies on dealing with North Korea, defining its relationships with key powers, and building up economic resilience. First, Seoul plans to maintain its audacious initiative policy that offers economic incentives to Pyongyang upon concrete actions towards denuclearization, indicating that despite the stall in negotiations and the North's growing provocations, the South will remain open to engagement. Highlighting its 3-axis deterrent strategy against North Korea's missile and nuclear threat, Seoul emphasized its alliance with the United States, bolstered by the recent Washington Declaration. A senior Yoon official told reporters that Seoul and Washington's nuclear consultation group will be formed within the year, with its first meeting potentially held during the summer, as well as a summit between Presidents Yoon and Joe Biden. On top of that, the allies in Tokyo are working to complete a trilateral missile warning system, with the US and Japan highlighted as the country's essential partners that share universal values. The strategy says Korea aims for a healthier and more mature relationship with China based on mutual respect and reciprocity. With confident diplomacy, Seoul intends to assert that the bilaterally contentious issue of deploying a US missile defense system on Korean soil is a matter of national sovereignty. On relations with Russia in its invasion of Ukraine, Seoul will continue joining global efforts to end the war and uphold sanctions on the Kremlin while maintaining stable relations with Moscow. Citing concern about the geopolitical rifts between the major powers, as well as trade uncertainties, Seoul looks to overcome its greatest security and economic challenges through a global comprehensive approach of collaborating more with other middle powers. Building on the Indo-Pacific strategy released in December, the new security strategy lays out more detailed steps to engage with other countries in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the European Union. Such cooperation is key to maintaining stability in supply chains and regional security, as well as tackling shared emerging challenges such as climate change and cyber attacks. To establish itself as a global pivotal state, South Korea says it will continue to actively participate and lead in multilateral fora and expand its development assistance in proportion to its international standing. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
South Korea has sternly protested to China and Russia over their military planes entering the country's air identification defense zone, KADIZ, on Tuesday without prior notice. The Defense Ministry on Wednesday said it lodged a complaint to China and Russia's military attaches in South Korea and expressed regret after their aircraft entered areas close to South Korean airspace. The ministry also urged the countries to take appropriate measures to prevent a recurrence, underlining that this could cause tensions in the region. On Tuesday, Chinese and Russian warplanes flew across the KADIZ without prior notice as part of their joint air patrol. Although it did not violate South Korea's territorial air, it prompted South Korea to scramble fighter jets. Marking the 70th anniversary of the South Korea-U.S. alliance, 4 U.S. lawmakers have launched a bipartisan Korea caucus in the Senate. The announcement was made on Tuesday local time by Democratic Senator Yoon of Georgia, one of the founding members. Joining him are Republican Senators Dan Sullivan of Alaska, Todd Young of Indiana, and Democrat Brian Schatz of Hawaii. The caucus goal is to strengthen Seoul-Washington ties in terms of economy, security, culture, and science. This is the first time a Korea caucus has been formed in the Senate. A Congressional Korea caucus kicked off in 2003 to foster more exchanges between the two countries. Recent economic growth outlooks by the OECD and the World Bank show that the global economy is slowly but surely on its way to recovery, despite the effect of monetary tightening policies still being felt. Or Moon Hye-ryun with the latest forecast figures.
South Korea's growth outlook for the year has been set lower than the overall global forecast, despite expectations that economic conditions will improve alongside a recovery in China. A report released by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development on Wednesday forecast global growth for the year ahead at 2.7%, and South Korea's growth rate at 1.5%. This is more than 1 percentage point lower than the country's growth seen last year at 2.6% and lower than an earlier forecast in March. The organization attributed its pessimistic outlook to high interest rates and a sluggish housing market, posing burdens on private consumption and investment. It also recommended the support of vulnerable groups here to enhance fiscal soundness in response to the country's aging population, such as training for the unemployed and improving women's participation in economic activities. As for the rest of the world, the OECD expects to see fragile growth this year, amid slowing inflation from falling energy prices and a rebound in consumer and business sentiment. The reopening of China's borders was also evaluated as having a positive impact on the global economy, with that country's predicted growth this year set at 5.4%. However, the Eurozone was predicted to grow at 0.9%, hindered by the ongoing war in Ukraine and high energy prices, Russia being one of only 2 OECD countries expected to experience a decline rather than growth for the year ahead. On the same day, the World Bank raised its global growth forecast from 1.7% to 2.1%. The bank also cut its global growth prediction for 2024 to 2.4% from the 2.7% made in January, citing the ongoing effects of monetary policy, which has seen business investment reduced. It also raised concerns over the possibility of a further economic slowdown caused by stress in the banking sector. By region, the World Bank shared similar views with the OECD in that China was predicted to show rapid growth this year, unlike the Eurozone. Meanwhile, on the back of the revised outlook, U.S. stocks closed higher on Tuesday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.03%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq gained 0.36%. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
South Korea's major umbrella labor union has today announced that it will stop participating in the president-led Economic, Social, and Labor Council for the first time in more than 7 years. Our Lee Dae-hyun tells us what's behind all that and what it means for the relationship between the labor union and the government.
One of South Korea's 2 major labor umbrella groups, the Federation of Korean Trade Unions, has decided to suspend its participation in the trilateral consultative body between labor management and the government. The decision was made for the first time in more than 7 years, meaning that the Economic, Social, and Labor Council will lack power as a communication channel between the labor union and the government. Around 50 union members sat down in a meeting on Wednesday, which took around an hour. Afterward, the chairman of the FKTU, Kim Dong-myung, said that the union's decision is powerful and basically means that the FKTU has pulled out from the Economic, Social, and Labor Council. He also said that it's more important for the union members to sort the issue out together. FKTU will not be leaving the council at this point, but the union said it can decide to completely withdraw from the council at any time. A result of Wednesday's discussion will be announced Thursday morning in a press conference at the Yongsan presidential office. This comes as President Yoon Suk-yeol a few weeks ago ordered a police crackdown on labor sit-ins. Late last month, an executive of the Federation of Korean Metal Workers Trade Unions was injured by police during a sit-in protest on top of a 7-meter-high steel structure, which the FKTU called an excessive use of force. The council was scheduled to hold the first governmental meeting with representatives of labor and management last Thursday, but was canceled due to the FKTU's absence. The Yoon administration and the umbrella labor union have been at odds following the government's labor reform policies, such as sluggish adjustments to the working hours and wage system, and the administration's plans to increase accounting transparency of labor unions. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
South Korea has decided to crack down on major firms stealing the technology of startups by increasing punitive measures. After discussions with the Ministry of SMEs and Startups, the police, and the Korea Intellectual Property Office, chief policymaker of the People Power Party Park Dae-chul told reporters on Wednesday that the ruling party and the government will push to boost the amount of compensation perpetrators must pay to a maximum of 5 times the damages incurred. He added that the country will set up a one-stop gateway platform for startups to troubleshoot relevant issues with the help of various ministries. Also present at today's meeting at the National Assembly were the heads of several startups who shared their personal experience of technical and contractual conflicts with South Korean conglomerates. President Yoon has reasserted his commitment to balanced development across the nation as he broke ground on a high-speed double-track railroad project in the city of Cheongju in Chungcheongbuk-do province. At the groundbreaking ceremony on Wednesday, the president said the launch of the double-track line across the country's mid-regions from Pyeongtaek to Osong Station will make all rail connections more accessible with more high-speed trains in operation. Reiterating his electoral pledge to establish a rail connection between Daejeon, Sejong, and other provincial cities, Yoon added that he would foster the Chungcheongbuk-do region as a national railway cluster and turn its existing biotech cluster into a hub of advanced technologies. Today, we take a closer look at politics. The Overseas Koreans Agency was officially launched earlier this week here in Korea, as had been much awaited for many Koreans living overseas. For more on this, we have our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo here in the studio with us. Welcome, Si-hoo.
Good evening.
So I heard you took a visit to the agency on the opening day. So where does the agency go from here?
Right, I did indeed, and I also got to have a chance to speak with the overseas Koreans themselves about what the agency means for them and what they expect from it. Let's take a look. To support the more than 7.5 million South Koreans living abroad, the Overseas Koreans Agency opened its doors on Monday.
앞으로 재외동포청은 재외동포들을 보호하고 지원하는 것은 물론 재외동포와 모국 간 교류, 협력을 촉진하는 연결고리와 역할을 수행할 것입니다.
The 151-person agency, with its headquarters in Incheon and a branch office in Gwanghwamun in central Seoul, oversees policies regarding South Koreans living overseas. The office in Gwanghwamun provides administrative support in many areas of overseas Koreans' lives. This support center in Gwanghwamun provides a one-stop service for many issues that affect overseas Koreans, such as nationality, immigration, and military service. Whereas before, overseas Koreans had to visit different agencies for different services, they can now receive a comprehensive service at the office conveniently located close to many embassies.
My daughter is an American citizen, so she might apply to recover her Korean citizenship again. And being close to the US Embassy and the Foreign Ministry makes it much more convenient.
My wife is Korean, my kids as well, they were born here. So, I mean, this is helpful for us because it's easier to get things done.
The launch of the agency was one of President Yoon Suk-yeol's election pledges and later a national task. Its establishment was made possible through the revision of the Government Organization Act that specified the launch of the agency under the umbrella of the Foreign Ministry. The revision passed the National Assembly and the Cabinet in late February.
I declare the passing of the partial revision of the Government Organisation Act with 266 approvals and 6 abstentions from the 272 present.
Overseas Koreans themselves welcome the change.
Now that it's beginning, I hope that practical, not-for-show policies and administration will take place with the well-being of more than 7.5 million overseas Koreans in mind.
At the same time, they further underlined the need for better channels of communication between the home country and the Korean communities overseas.
I've been thinking it'd be nice for South Korea to refer to the voices, thoughts, and wisdom of overseas Koreans.
Meanwhile, the head of the agency, Lee Ki-chul, vowed to listen to their many voices and offer practical help.
Now, Shihu, some news for many. And now a need for better channels of communication was mentioned. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yes, Jungmin, it seems so that many of the Koreans residing abroad that I had spoken to had not actually heard about the launch of the agency, and they experienced difficulty accessing related information in the country of their residence, especially for the third or fourth or even fifth generation immigrants who are not so fluent in Korean. It was more difficult to acquire the necessary information in their native language. Let's listen into Mr. Han Ki-deok, who shares more on this.
I've met overseas Koreans from the United States and from Germany too. And unless they're first or second generation, they're not so fluent in Korean. If the Korean government carries out policymaking with just the voices of the first generation, it'd be meaningless as it can't reach third, fourth, or even fifth generations.
So listening to their voices matter.
That's right, Jungmin. The agency's head Lee Ki-chul said that he is aware of the identity issues experienced by the third or fourth generation of overseas Koreans and that he will work harder to let them know how South Korea is a country they can be proud of, in addition to teaching them the Korean language. He also emphasized that the agency will listen more to the overseas Koreans themselves as well as experts and the press.
Looking forward to hearing more from you, our political correspondent Lee Shi-hoo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Early summer-like conditions will continue for most parts of the country. Maximum temperatures in Seoul will be topping out at 26 degrees Celsius. Unstable atmospheric conditions over central regions will drop showers tomorrow. With the rain, overall conditions may feel muggy and humid. Showers will start tomorrow afternoon. As for the amount of rainfall, northern Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do province will see 10 to 40 millimeters. The Seoul metropolitan area and the surrounding regions will see 5 to 20. This round of showers will last until Friday morning. Thunder and lightning may follow at times. Dense layers of fog may build up for the morning hours for central regions. For those driving, please be extra careful out on the roads. For southern parts of the country where no rain is in the forecast, UV radiation will be intense. Partly cloudy to overcast skies are expected for the morning hours. Seoul and Gwangju will start off at 18 degrees. Highs in Seoul and Chuncheon will get up to 26, Daejeon 30, Busan will be reaching 25 degrees. Frequent showers are expected for central regions for the remainder of the week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session is next.
In what sort of environments do new enterprises typically flourish and succeed? It should be a place that helps an enterprise to grow, where an enterprise can realize its unlimited potential with talented human resources, where the success of a business is guaranteed. It is the Chungbuk Free Economic Zone.
We are trendy. We are tradition. We are Busan. We are future. We are nature. We are Busan. We are energetic. We are eco-friendly. We are Busan. The city, ready for World Expo. We are Busan. Busan is ready for World Expo.
제주도에 처음에 놀러 갔을 때 새롭게 단장했다고 영상이 나와봤는데
할게요. 스트릿 사진 한 장이었는데 혼자서 좋은 건축을
한국인들만의 마음들.
같이 갈래요?
있지 않은가요? 처음 태어난 이별에서 사는 우리 손잡아요.
Hello everyone, it's Wednesday, the week's midway point, and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. All eyes are on Pyongyang to see whether the regime goes for a second attempt to launch a spy satellite. North Korea has been protesting against the notion that the satellite launch goes against UNSC resolutions and has even threatened the International Maritime Organization, saying it may not give prior notice before another launch. Amid such tensions during the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo reaffirmed their agreement on real-time data sharing on North Korean missile threats. And perhaps in opposition to those trilateral ties, on Tuesday, Chinese and Russian warplanes entered Korea's Air Defense Identification Zone, or KADIZ. How are these tensions going to develop? For an in-depth analysis, we welcome into the studio Dr. Go Myung-hyun, Senior Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Evans Revere, Senior Advisor at Albright Stonebridge Group. Mr. Revere is also a former Acting Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Mr. Revere, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, first question to our Dr. Go. Now, North Korea previously launched satellites, Kwangmyeong-sun 3-2 and Kwangmyeong-sun 4, as far as I know, though we do not know whether they are working right now. This time's first spy satellite was named Mallikyung, right? Could you give us some background on the origin and the reasons behind such names?
So Mallikyung, the recently launched the spy satellite by North Korea, means the Korean in Korean word, it means a telescope that you are able to see 10,000 yards away. So essentially the idea that they are able to see far away. So which essentially I think explains the nature and the attributes of this particular satellite. So essentially this is an observation or reconnaissance satellite. And the reason why this is interesting is because North Korea tend to have this naming scheme for their satellites that they use the term Kwangmyeong-song. Kwangmyeong-song is a lodestar, which is which essentially stands for Kim Jong-il, the current leader's father, late father. So, for instance, the founder of North Korea is the son, and then the son of the founder is Kim Jong-il, and then his nickname will be the Kwangmyeong-song or the Lodestar. So, and then North Korea has been using this nomenclature for all this time, but this time around they abandoned this naming scheme, and so this is, I think, significant in many ways. For instance, I think abandoning the name that actually denotes the name of the father of the current leader shows that Kim Jong-un is trying to separate himself from his father's legacy. And then added to that, there's the technical nature of the satellite. So it represents the evolution of the North Korea's space technology. So what it means basically is that the North Koreans are reserving the name Kwangmyeong-song for symbolic events or like a groundbreaking technological breakthrough, such as the first time that North Korea launched a satellite into space, into the orbit. So I think from now on, Kim Jong-un is going to use naming schemes that are more technical, more technical, that denotes the actual attribute, actual nature of the North Korea's advancements in space as well as in other military aspects.
Right, interesting. Now, Mr. Revere, last week's launch took place at a new launch site located 3 kilometers away from an existing launch pad at the Seoul Satellite Launching Ground. And experts say the preparation process is very different depending on the location of the launch. How is it different?
Well, I think the most interesting takeaway that I've seen from looking at the commercial satellite imagery and reading some of the analyses that have been appearing on the internet and in various periodicals, the most interesting takeaway is that North Korea was actually making launch preparations. There was launch activities going on simultaneously, both at the new launch site as well as the main launch site. So for me, that was quite interesting. We can speculate why that was going on, but the fact is that there was missile activity that we could see in real time on the satellite imagery going on in both locations. And it was almost as if, more than just speculation now, North Korea from the beginning was anticipating more than one launch here, because the imagery after the recent launch has shown that the activity at the main launch site continues. Launch preparation activity continues there. So it's not unreasonable with that background in mind to begin to think that there is another launch coming up within the next several days or so. And I would just note an important footnote here. The warning to ships and aircraft that North Korea issued through the IMO, that warning is through the 11th of June. So it is certainly theoretically possible that the North Koreans may very well be preparing another launch, and that launch would take place at some point between now and the 11th of June.
I see. Now, Dr. Go, so Kim Yo-jong vowed to go ahead with another launch as soon as possible. And given that Kim Jong-un is very eager to secure this ISR capabilities, it does seem like, as our Mr. Revere pointed out, that we will have to see one more coming up soon. Do you agree that North Korea was aiming for more than one launch from the beginning?
I think so, definitely, because part of the reason is because North Korea has tested a new space vehicle model. So clearly North Korea understands that there are a lot of uncertainties regarding the success of such a launch. So I'm sure they made provisions to make sure that, if the first launch fails, then they can immediately try out the second one. So this speaks volumes about the approaches that North Koreans are taking under Kim Jong-un. They are essentially more pragmatic than the predecessors. Kim Jong-un's predecessors used to be, for instance, under Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, they try to hide failures from the public view. But then Kim Jong-un is different in the sense that he acknowledges the failures. And that was also shown in the statement that the North Korean government issued right in the aftermath of the failure of the launch. Right. So that means also they are making provisions to learn from, apply the lessons of the failure and then apply necessary changes and make sure that the second attempt is successful. But the question is whether the second attempt will be successful too. So I think that's the reason why North Koreans are making sure that the second one is going to be successful, because after the second one, it's unlikely that North Koreans have made provisions for a third, essentially insurance launch. So I think we'll be interested to see whether North Koreans will be able to be successful in the second one.
Right, we'll have to wait and see. Now, Mr. Revere, regarding the second spy satellite launch attempt, now in response to the IMO's first ever adoption of a resolution condemning the satellite launch, Pyongyang said, as you have talked about it earlier, it will no longer let the IMO know of future rocket launch plans. Should we be worried about this?
Well, anytime the North Koreans launch a missile or a rocket and do not notify the international community about it, yes, we should be worried. But the important technical detail that I pointed out earlier should be kept in mind. I mean, the North Koreans obviously were not pleased about the IMO's reaction to their launch, and so they have made this threat. How serious they are about that, I don't know. But the fact is that if North Korea, between now and the 11th of June, including the 11th of June, launches a similar rocket, a similar missile, on a similar flight path, then that alert that they've already given through the IMO would still hold. It would still be the guidance that airmen and ships should follow. But if we go beyond that date and North Korea fails to alert aircraft and ships in the area, then that is obviously a serious concern. Let's also keep in mind that over the decades, North Korea has on a number of occasions launched missiles and rockets into nearby waters and through that airspace without issuing the appropriate warning. So there is a precedent for this dangerous kind of behavior. But the next few days will tell us which direction the North Koreans are heading in.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, meanwhile, amid tensions on the peninsula, Chinese and Russian military aircraft entered the KADIZ for around an hour on Tuesday. Though the aircraft did not violate Korean's airspace, there was no prior notice given to authorities, according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What does this mean?
So this is not a new behavior by Russia and China. It has been, they have done this before, and then I think they've been carrying out such air patrols and the intrusion into Korean airspace. Korean, defense, air identification zone, or KADIZ, since at least 2018. So it's been going on, ongoing for several years, and I think it started with the growing the friction between Korea and Japan over many, historical and political issues, which I think show to the Chinese and Russians that there's an opportunity to drive a wedge between Korea and Japan, and then therefore weakening the U.S.-led defense architecture in Northeast Asia by conducting such air patrols. So they've been testing not just the cohesion of the alliance between United States, Japan, United States, Korea, and also the trilateral security cooperation. They also testing the readiness of the air forces of the respective countries. So I think, but this time around, given the background of improvement of relations between Seoul and Tokyo, as well as the strengthening of the trilateral defense coordination, I think this time around, the Russian and Chinese behavior has a different meaning. It's probably that the Russians and Chinese are trying to send a message to the three countries, Korea, Japan, and United States, that the Russia and China are not deterred by the strengthening of the defense cooperation, that they will continue to conduct this kind of threatening and provocative actions for the foreseeable future. So this is one way for Russia and China to develop a leverage over the three countries in Northeast Asia and make sure that their presence is felt very keenly in this part of the world.
I see. Now, Mr. Revere, staying with Russia and China here, another UNSC meeting recently ended without a concrete outcome yet again. Is structural reform the only way to tackle this series of inaction caused by Russia and China's veto power? And with South Korea again elected to the UNSC after an 11-year absence as a non-permanent member, will this in any way help?
Well, quite frankly, the idea of reforming the UN Security Council and carrying out the sort of structural reform that you suggested is probably certainly a difficult and probably an impossible task, quite frankly. And the Russians and the Chinese know that. The idea of major changes to the UN Security Council at this point in time, particularly with the Council so divided, is just not going to happen. The Russians and the Chinese have made a very careful strategic calculation or recalculation, if you will, of their respective relations with North Korea. Both Moscow and Beijing regard North Korea as a de facto strategic partner, a strategic ally. And to the extent that a nuclear-armed North Korea and a hostile North Korea makes life difficult for the United States and for the Republic of Korea and for Japan, that in the view of Moscow and Beijing works to their advantage. So I think we are in a new situation now. The fact that we've had so many Security Council meetings that have failed to produce any sort of progress on this is the new normal right now. This is what we're going to have to live with going forward. But the final point that you made about the Republic of Korea coming onto the Security Council for a 2-year term, that's an important one. The Republic of Korea's voice needs to be heard, a voice of responsibility, a voice of concern, a voice that reflects the views of more than 50 million ROK citizens. That voice needs to be heard. South Korea's voice needs to be listened to, and I think it's important. It'll be an important reminder to Moscow and Beijing that there is yet one more country in the international community that is determined to stand up for what's right and ask them to do the right thing when it comes to dealing with North Korea in the future.
I see. Now, Dr. Go, moving on to the pull-aside meetings that were held on the margins of the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. Seoul and Washington's defense ministers, they agreed to conduct a joint investigation once the salvage operation of the sunken rocket is complete. Now, what data could be collected from the wreckage?
Oh, it's going to be an intelligence bonanza for the alliance. The last time this happened was back in 2012, when North Korea had a similar failure with their space vehicle, and this is a very golden opportunity to collect very sensitive intelligence. And then this is only possible because North Koreans launched a rocket because this is a characteristic of the space vehicle launch. Unlike the ballistic missiles that can be launched in any direction, and usually they fall in the deep waters of the East Sea. The space vehicles that are launched from North Korea, they have to head it towards the equator, meaning that whenever they fail, they fall into the shallow waters of the Yellow Sea, which enable us, South Korea and the United States to salvage the remnants of the debris of the space vehicles and analyze them. And then it's been like 10 years since the alliance has been able to analyze the components and materials that are used to make the North Korea space vehicles. And this time around, what's more important is that North Korea claims that they used a new model of a space vehicle. And so that means that it represents the cutting edge of North Korea's space technology, which is of course highly correlated with the degree of advancements that North Korea has been able to reach in developing their intercontinental ballistic missiles. So the combination of factors, the shallow waters, the relative, the fact that the state of the debris is pre-intact, I think it represents a major intelligence victory on the part of Korea and the United States, a major failure for North Korea. So I think for the North Korean regime, this represents a double failure. So not just the fact that they failed to successfully launch a new space vehicle, but added to that, what's added to the injury is the fact that North Korea is allowing Seoul and Washington to have access to the most sensitive technology that North Korea possesses right now.
Right, interesting. It'll be a chance for us to know what kind of technology North Korea has right now. Right. One more question, Dr. Go. Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo agreed to operate a system to share this real-time information on North Korean missile warning, right? And that is going to happen within this year. What details are being discussed? So
it's going to be mostly about monitoring the trajectory of North Korea's missile launches. So what the three countries are going to share will be the location of the launch and the relative angle of launch and where it falls. So this is actually represents the precursor to the information that the intelligence that three countries can use to intercept the North Korea's missiles. So I think in that sense, this is a very sensitive development. Not just for the three countries that are forming this partnership, but also for North Korea and China. I think this is expected because given the advancements that North Korea has reached and the increase in threat on the part of North Korea with their ballistic missile program, it was about time for the three countries to come together and then develop this kind of coordination. But then I think this has implication beyond the Korean Peninsula because this is exactly the scenario that China was concerned about, that the three countries will be working together and monitor not just the North Korea's ballistic missiles, but also the Chinese ones. So essentially, the three countries are starting the foundation of an early detection system, and this is going to be the foundation for any viable missile defense system. So this has very strong downstream implications.
I see, significant move indeed. Now, Mr. Revere, what caught my eye is that the real-time sharing of data will for now focus on North Korean missile threats. Now, could this be a way to show that South Korea is not going to be part of Washington's missile defense system for now, given that China could be very sensitive about this matter?
I don't think that's the central message that Korea is broadcasting by agreeing to participate in this. The greatest near-term threat to the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the United States right now is North Korea, especially a North Korea that has declared as a matter of national policy its right to conduct first nuclear strikes. So the biggest priority for Seoul, for Tokyo, and for Washington right now is the sort of cooperation that we've been discussing for the last couple of minutes, real-time exchanges of information to deal with the most immediate threat. Downstream, however, this cooperation has the possibility and the potential to expand beyond North Korea. I suspect it will. But for now, I think South Korea is rightfully focused, as the United States and Japan both are, on the most immediate threat of concern to each of them, a nuclear threat, a missile threat from a country that has threatened to conduct first nuclear strikes.
Right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, South Korean and Japanese defense minister too held a meeting, and they decided to stop making an issue of this radar lock-on dispute that dates back to 2018. What was the stark difference that made both of the parties to make this an issue for more than around 3 to 4 years? And do you believe this issue being dealt with in this way is a constructive way?
Well, after all, that was in a way the radar incident, or like the surveillance plane incident, the maritime patrol plane incident, was pretty much played up in the background of the growing tension between Seoul and Tokyo. So the incident itself was quite a minor one. I mean, you can attribute to it serious significance if you want to, but you can also play it down if you want to. So essentially, it was really was depending on the eye of the beholder. So essentially, if you want to play it up for political reasons, you could. And in this time around, the two parties have agreed that this wasn't a serious incident that underpinned the relationship between Seoul and Tokyo for the future. So the two sides essentially agreed to turn the page and close a chapter on this sordid affair that wasn't really a major issue anyways. So I think this shows that when the South Korea and Japan can have similar goals, they can overcome any kind of differences. So in that sense, I think we should take this as a lesson that the relationship between Seoul and Tokyo can be politicized, but then when we politicize it, there are downstream repercussions, negative repercussions for both countries.
Right. Now, Mr. Vivier, I believe this could be our last question. South Korean Defense Minister reportedly held a 50-minute meeting with his new Chinese counterpart and emphasized the role of China in achieving peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. What role could China play, and is it willing to play?
Those are two very important and very different questions. I think it was the right thing to do to have the meeting. I think it was important to keep the channels of dialogue open between Seoul and Beijing on defense and security matters. Obviously, Korea has a big stake on the Korean Peninsula and how China manages these issues. I think it's important to continue to remind Beijing, remind the PRC that it needs to play a responsible role in dealing with the burgeoning threat that we're seeing from North Korea. As I suggested in my remarks earlier, Beijing has not been doing a very effective job either in the UN Security Council or in other fora in being helpful to the ROK, to the United States and the international community. So it was good for South Korea's defense minister to remind China of what South Korea's expectations are. Having said that, is China going to, as a result of this meeting, change its approach of treating North Korea as the strategic and tactical ally that it is? I don't think so. I think we are in a different game here when it comes to the Korean Peninsula vis-a-vis China's role in being a de facto partner, supporter, and ally of North Korea. That's the new reality we face, and that's what we're going to have to deal with for the coming years.
All right, I see your point. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition, but thank you, Dr. Go and Mr. Revere, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
You're welcome.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.